Let's imagine we've got to make a project about defining the process to make Austrian cider. On one side, we've got our developers, who know a lot about developing software, but they have no idea about cider production process. On the other side, we have an Austrian cider expert, who has no idea about programming or developing software, but he knows a lot about the cider process. So, what are our possible solutions to make a good definition of the cider production process? Well, developers can learn about cider, but they won't know as much as the expert, and the process won't be as perfectly defined as it was done by him. We can teach the cider expert about software developing, but we've got the same problem. He won't be as good as our developers, and he won't have the experience in developing software. At this point, we can think about a solution between the previous ones. Why don't we develop some easy tools for the cider expert so he can define the process on his own? We can define a model or a language for him to define the process, for example with plain text. He can write the activities and the transitions between that activities, or for example with diagrams. He can define the process with boxes, circles, and arrows in an easy way for him so that he can only has to concentrate on doing a good definition for the cider production process. In this video, I'm going to make an overview of JPDL and xTEXT as a way to reach that solution. This is an example for a cider production process made with JPDL. JPDL gives us a process definition language, which is great. We don't have to define the language, we only have to use it. Here, we've got the elements we can use for our diagrams. For example, we've got the starting point and the end point for the process, and state activity, task activity, decision for conjoin for concurrent activities. If we want to use one of them, we only have to select it and then place it in the diagram like this. Then we can move it in the diagram, make it bigger, and we can change the name. For example, let's call it buy. Then we can set a transition. Let's say first we have to buy some products and then we can cook. It's very easy to define a process with this tool. When we are defining the process with the diagram, the program is making an XML for the diagram with the same information. Here you can see the elements and their properties, and the transitions between the elements. The only weird thing here is this property. It's to place the elements in the diagram. Well, and what if we want a new activity and we don't have it here? For example, we need a mail activity. Well, I made it here with Notificar Envío. I placed a state activity. But if you see the XML for that activity, it's not a state, it's a mail. But the property I need for that mail, I need a template. And the program allows me to do that. There are other graphic tools that let you define models with diagrams, and then you define the process using that models, like for example DSL for .NET. And that's all about this fast overview about JPDL. If you Google a bit, you can find some videos made by my classmates about how to begin using JPDL. Now let's talk about xTEXT. This is again an example for the same cider production process, but in this case it's made with xTEXT. This tool lets us define our own language to define the process. Here we define a language with easy rules. For example, here we say our process is going to have some nodes, and it's going to have some transitions. Here we say that the nodes or activities can be one of these. And then we set the properties for the activities or the nodes. We can set some validations. For example, let's say that my activities can't start with capital letter. If I try to do it, the program will warn me about it. When we define the language, we can start defining the process. With JPDL, we define it with boxes, circles, and arrows, and here we have to do it only with plain text. But it isn't hard anyway. For example, here you can see the activities and its names, a main activity and state, a decision with its property, fork, join, and then I've got the transitions between them. Once we've got the process defined, we can use a template, for example, made with XPath to convert it to XML, for example. Here I got the XML for that process, and as you can see, it's very similar to the generated with JPDL. If we apply a style sheet, we can obtain a web document, for example, like this one. And here we have the process defined, but in a web document. So with this tool, we can define a language. With that language, we can define a process. And once we've got it, we can convert it as we need to XML, to PDF. And that's all about this fast overview about xText. Again, if you Google a bit, you can find some videos made by my classmates about how to begin using xText. I hope you found this useful.